Hey, how you doing? Hope you all are doing great. As you seen in the thumbnail, in this video, we are gonna see, imagine Naruto founder of Justice League and had harem with Catwoman and Poison Ivy. This is part 1 and 130 likes on this, and I will upload part 2 and comment down your thoughts. Before getting into video, I request you to check the author of this fanfic and show some love and support. Name of the story is Justice League, Fire Shadow by Freedom Guard. Do check it out. All details in description. Let's get into the video. Also check out Patreon for uncensored spicy content, link in description. The city was beautiful, tall skyscrapers, bright lights, beautiful views, the sounds of life itself as people moved about. And none of them made any sense to the observer, and for good reason, as this observer in question happened to be not from this world. And at this very moment, he was trying to figure out what he was going to do now that he was getting into reach of this city. Where in the name of the kami am I? Naruto Namikaze Uzumaki had no idea what he was doing here in this world right now, and while he was still able to remain hidden while he was in the forest outside of the city, everything that he was looking at right now was something that he had never seen before, and it was something that made the blonde shinobi from Konoha all the more confused by what he was looking at this very moment. The blonde looked about, and the roads were unlike anything he had seen before in his life. Strange metal-looking carts didn't have any horses or people moving them to their destination, and every so often he spotted smoke coming from some sort of pipe that was behind them. There were of the strange things, and they were of different sizes to boot. As he looked at the things carefully and tried to make some sense of it all, he had seen some things like those in his travels in the elemental countries as well as his trip to spring country, but they were nothing like the ones that he was seeing before him right now. And the buildings, the buildings in places like Iwa, Konoha, Suna, and several others were tall, but there were no buildings this size in all of his travels at all, and this added even more to the confusion that was hitting the blonde. He however decided that he might as well go back to his place and try to make some sense on what he was doing here in this world that seemed to defy just about everything that he knew of. In a nearby clearing in the forest, Naruto sat down in the clearing and managed to calm down and begin to piece together what had happened earlier. He had been on a mission, possibly his last mission for Konoha before he had here as he began to think on the events. It had already been 3 years since he formally handed the title of Hokage to Konohamaru and decided to travel around the elemental countries. Most ninja would have been marked as missing nin and hunted down, but he was a special case for a number of reasons. The first was his actions in the Fourth Shinobi War, which ended in victory for the Shinobi Alliance and resulted in the defeat of Uchiha Madara, Kabuto Yakushi, and his former friend Sasuke Uchiha. He had managed to accomplish his father's hopes in defeating Madara to save the world and honor his mother Kushina as well. And while he had not killed Sasuke, he had finally put an end to his former friend's plans for revenge. It had hurt him to know that nothing he could do would change Sasuke, and he wished that there was another way, but he was not young anymore. He had grown up, and while he did not kill Sasuke, he did not let him win. The power left to him by Itachi proved to be key to stop Sasuke, and when that was over, he advocated full exile for him. The power given to him by Itachi cancelled out Sasuke's own eternal Magankyo Sharingan, and this allowed him to blind Sasuke forever. Which was why he decided not to kill Sasuke. Sasuke cursed him for this, but he replied that he could handle it, for he was a shinobi and willing to take the pain and the hatred to change the world. The second was the fact that he was hailed as a hero and savior of the ninja world, and while there had been some resistance to his desire to reform the shinobi system, the others agreed with him. He rose to heroic status not just in Konoha but in other places as well, and as such, his name was recognized literally worldwide. The third was his being the new Hokage. Tsunade formally stepped down from being Hokage months after the end of the war and gave the title to him. That was shocking, as by all rights he was still a genin, but many ninja agreed that he was no longer a genin in their eyes. His accomplishments and his powers made him cage material many times over, and while he tried to discount it, many people began to state that he was the sage of the Six Paths Reborn. He took the position, and while he admitted that he had no idea how to actually be a Hokage, he was more than willing to learn and do his best, which was why he formally asked Tsunade, Kakashi, Shizune, and Yamato to be his advisors. Though the last of the Sannin did not like it, she accepted it out of her respect for him, and he was thankful for her advice and that of his new council and his friends. His reign as Hokage was interesting, and while paperwork was a pain in the neck for him, he was not going to turn down his responsibilities, and besides, his Kage Bushin Jutsu cut down the time he needed for that part of his work. Apart from that, he had been working for the restoration and rebuilding of Konoha after the war, and he was pleased in those days to have so many friends in different places in the world. The fact that he was able to have such allies made Konoha a lot stronger politically, diplomatically, and economically. And while there had been battles that he had to be part of, he was more than willing to go all out and do what he could for the people of not just Konoha, but for all the nations, which further cemented his legacy as Hokage and earned him the title of the legendary Orange Hokage. An odd title to be sure, but he did not mind, as he had a feeling his father Minato Namikaze and his mother Kushina Uzumaki would have enjoyed it. And the last was his being he head of the newly revived Uzumaki clan. When he took the position of Hokage, he had been given the shock of his life when he was informed by Tsunade and Shikaku about the law regarding clans, namely when only one male heir is left. Tsunade explained that since he was by all rights the last of the fabled Uzumaki clan, he had a duty to rebuild the clan, and that meant being married, and it was recommended that he would be allowed to have more than one wife. That made him blush to the point that he felt like steam was going to come out of his ears, much to the amusement of everyone. He swore that Tsunade seemed to take some slightly perverse pleasure in him being like this, and even Kakashi was grinning from ear to ear underneath that darn mask of his. When that announcement came out into the open about his full lineage and the events of that night, it unleashed a torrent of changes in Konoha. The ones who had once disliked and hated him were shamed to know that they had spent a good deal of time harming the son of the fourth Hokage and also the hero of the whole ninja world. He had spent a large amount of time to assure them all that he had no desire to harm them for what the Y had done, and explained that he had grown up already. He was not the same young boy they knew, and he had no hatred in his heart for them. He had made peace with himself and their reasons for hating them. The only thing he wanted from them was to recognize him not as the son of Minato Namikaze and Kushina Uzumaki, but as a ninja of Konoha and a young man of worth. He wanted them to also recognize him for his own accomplishments and not for the legacy of his father, since he was like his father in wanting to succeed through hard work and effort. The villagers were more than happy to do that and were in full support of him. That was also when he had to deal with the fact that he needed to take a wife, or rather several wives, in order to found the clan. He did have perverted dreams out being with more than one woman at times, but he was not sure that he was ready for such a thing happening to him in real life, even if it was officially sanctioned by law. He still had feelings for Sakura, but was not sure if she felt the same, and of course there was the situation between him and Hinata that had not yet been resolved after the Fourth Shinobi War. He recalled her confession to him when she was facing pain, despite the fact that by all rights she had no chance before him, and he was still shocked by it and trying to make sense on how to properly respond to her confession. They were not on bad terms with one another, but it was still awkward for him to know that she felt that strongly for him. That was why he decided to take some more time to think about what he was going to do before he made his decision on following this law or not. After a while he managed to speak to both Hinata and Sakura, and it surprised him that Sakura was aware of Hinata's love for him and was actually alright with it. And in turn she spoke that over time she had indeed developed feelings for him as well, wishing to make sure that she did what she could to make up for all that he had done for her, as well as try again if he wanted her to do so. This had been a long discussion between the three of them, and it was not long before the three came to an agreement to at least take the time to work on their feelings. He got the surprise of his life when they were even willing to share him as well, and if he wanted, they were willing to marry him. The idea of being married to the two of them was something that surprised the blonde Hokage, and he replied that he needed time to think about going that far. However, it was not long before Hinata and Sakura were not the only women who would make that statement to him. Amaru came to him and was there to say that she was willing to marry him as well and help in what he would need in taking care of his people as well himself, along with being a doctor to him. She was also followed by Shion herself, as the priestess ruler of the land of demons wanted to further ties between her people and Naruto's own people, as well as aid him if he needed someone to help him fight any other demons that might rise to be threats to the world, not to mention that she wanted to remind him of his promise to help her pass her powers to a new priestess. The whole situation was further complicated somewhat by the arrival of Koyuki herself, who wanted to cement a more beneficial and permanent alliance with Konoha, and the only way to do that was by marriage, and it was obvious who she had in mind as her husband, further confounding Naruto. The next shocker was the fact that the current Mizukage, Meiturumi, was also interested in forging better ties with Konoha. Plus, seeing him seemed to have gained her interest a great deal, making him shake his head at this. Not to mention the other women from in Fire Country and outside the Elemental Nation as well, who came to offer their hands in marriage as well. He knew that most guys would love this situation, and so was he, but this was too sudden to his liking. The good news was that at least he was given the time to build his relationships with them, and that was something he was utterly thankful for. Eventually he began to get used to being around the women who wanted to be with him and developed relationships with them. Though the most prominent were with Hinata and Sakura, as they were close to him in many ways. His other relationships, which were with Koyuki, Mei, Amaru, and Shion LSO, grew over time, and for that he was very thankful, as it made the whole situation a lot more tolerant to him until it was time for him to get married. Once he made his choice, though, he parted in amicable terms with the others who sought him as a husband. The whole affair was celebrated in Konoha as delegates from every corner of the elemental nations came to see the event. After all, it was not every day that the hero of the ninja world was going to be married, and to women with considerable talents, to say the very least. Of course, he had to deal with the fact that his male friends were curious about how the wedding night was for him. He was able to keep his trap shut, but they had no problems guessing that it was quite the experience for him when he was blushing to the point he would have easily surpassed Hinata in the bushing department. Kakashi was utterly amused and had no problem needling him, though in a good way, and even Iruka and Yamato laughed at it, while Sai just smiled in his usual fashion. Though this time around, the smile was not forced in any possible way and was actually real. Afterwards, he was now taking his duties very seriously, and while there were ages of peace in the land, there were still those who sought to incite war and chaos, so his work was hardly over. But with all the support he was getting, he was more than ready and willing to go all out in order to see that such threats would be dealt with through peaceful means before going to force when all else failed. Not to mention his wives were more than willing to teach him a number of skills and techniques to help him if there was a chance that they could not be by his side. And he finally felt the same joy he had seen his father Minato had when he was born, when he also saw his children being born. It was sad to him that neither his parents were able to see him finally have children. He could easily guess that his mother Kushina would have lovingly dotted on her grandchildren will. His father Minato would take pride in training them in his free time and when he was not busy. But he had no doubt in his mind that they were watching him in the afterlife, and no doubt his sensei, the pervy sage Jiraiya, was enjoying it as well. There was no doubt in his mind that the white-haired perverted ninja would have written a whole library worth of smut after what he had seen as well. He also took to heart that his children would be another reason, along with so many other youths, for him to defend Konoha for as long as he could and be able to. And he in turn would defend his grandchildren when they too would be born. But like anything else, there was a bad side to things, namely in his Uzumaki heritage. He aged slower than the women he married, and due to that bloodline from his mother, it was hard for him to know that he was not going to be able to grow old with them, even more so with the QB's purified chakra giving him a very high healing factor that made him heal faster and better. This made him become a living symbol of the name of the Uzumaki clan. Initially he was able to deal with it, but it was not long before it was going to be painful for him, as he knew that his loved ones would pass on long before he would. Sakura and the others understood it and did their best to assure him that they did not have any problems with it, but they did insist to him that he should not burden himself if they passed away while he was still alive, and lived to enjoy the world. He promised them that, but it was not easy for him in any sense, as he had done so much and he was not afraid to die. He was even interested to finally meet his parents and even the pervy sage along with the third Hokage. To know that it would be a long time before he himself reached his end was hard to accept at times. And the following deaths were hard on him. First was Tsunade, who passed on after so many years, though she died with a smile on her face and being surrounded by his children and grandchildren, who she had become a godmother and great godmother to. She was soon joined by Shizune, who had at least been able to marry, and Tsuruka no less, who also joined her in death, succeeded by their own children. Both were truly important to him, as Shizune was like a big sister to him and a god aunt to his children and grandchildren, and Tsuruka was like his big brother father figure. Kakashi himself finally passed on as well, though he had at least been married to Ayame and had 2 children who now served as Jonin, and they too had grandchildren who were going to be great ninja as well, like their grandfather. He honored his former teacher and placed his name alongside his own teammates and their Jonin sensei, his father, and he made sure that Ayame's own funeral was well planned out, as she and her also long dead father were 2 more people he loved and treasured in life. His own classmates were also long gone, though they too lived good lives, which was why he was able to deal with their passing on, though it was hardly a simple affair. Ino and Sai passed on, though they were married and had children when they died. It still amazed him that they were even married. And Sai admitted that being married to Ino was interesting to say the least. He was proud that their children were doing their parents proud, and so did their grandchildren. He had no idea just how he too even managed to finally tie the knot, but he also knew that Ino was happy and Sai was being genuine about being married to her. Neji and Tenten were also married, something that he found rather funny when he was told of their engagement. He had a feeling that sooner or later, Tenten's support for Neji was going to turn romantic at some point in time. And he was not alone either, as Hinata used to tell him that her cousin thought of his teammate a lot more than he used to after the war. They too passed away together, and he made sure that both were buried side by side, since they had been working well as a team both in the battlefield and out of it. Shikamaru finally got out and married Temari as well, and for that he was utterly amused, considering Temari's bossy nature and Shikamaru's dislike for bossy women. But at least despite their differences, they did get along, and at least his lazy teammate finally managed to win Kankuro and Gaara's approval of him marrying their sister. Most guys steered clear of Temari due to her brothers, but Shikamaru finally managed to win their support, and despite his worries, he discovered that his dad was right about women being different with their loved ones. He and Gaara were the ones to oversee the funeral respectively, and it was a hard thing to do. Rock Lee managed to finally be a Jonin and rise to the same level of his sensei Guy at his prime as well. This was something that Guy was proud of. And to the amusement of everyone, even Kurenai Lee was able to finally meet the love of his life. Yakumo herself had spent time with Lee, and while she could not be a ninja alongside him, she proved to be a person who Lee cared deeply about. Lee loved Yakumo, and she had those very same feelings as well, and they were able to have some children of their own, and Yakumo was able to see them all grow to adulthood despite the weakness of her body. In the end though, Yakumo died due to her frail form, but she was happy to be with Lee, and Lee himself was happy to be with her. When she died years afterwards, Lee honored her by training their children, who thankfully were as healthy as he was to be ninja. Lee himself died in TTLE, but died with a smile, saving his children from a force of ninja trying to kill them. He personally carried Lee back to Konoha and buried him alongside his team as well as his wife, who had been welcomed by Neji and Tenten as well. Choji himself eventually found a wife, and the woman was a kunoichi by the name Suza from Suna as well, who proved that even those guys who were big-boned as Choj I preferred to call it could get married. Suza was a very attractive woman, but appeared to like Choji a great deal and was not the least bit bothered by his size, much to the surprise of Ino and Shikamaru. They had several children, and she was welcomed warmly by Choji's parents when they finally met her. Even he was surprised at the good fortune that hit Choji, and not a day went by that he called laughing with Choji about it all. And it was therefore hard for Choji when Suza passed away after so many years together, but he manned up and became a good father to their children and a grandfather to their grandchildren, and he was buried next to Suza when he too passed away, but not before doing the same ceremony for his family heiress, their firstborn daughter Chauna. Kiba and Akamaru eventually found their own mates, with Kiba actually getting along with the Kumo Kunoichi Karui, though how that ever happened, he could never understand, and Akamaru finally being able to find a mate in a female canine named Kuromaru. Akamaru had a number of pups, and Kiba as well as Karui had several children, with Karui being able to be in Konoha and Kumo. They too eventually were with Kiba and Akamaru being the first, with Karui and Kuromaru joining them. He personally oversaw the funeral as well to make sure that his friends and their mates would be remembered for all the Y had done in and after the Fourth Shinobi War. Shino eventually had married as well with a member of the Hyuga branch family, a kunoichi named Aya, who was a distant cousin of Neji who idolized her cousin and proved as capable as Neji and Hinata, though not as stern. It amazed everyone, even Neji and Hinata, that Shino would find a partner, but they congratulated him and he thanked them in his own way. They have 3 sons and 4 daughters, with the boys able to use the Byakugan and the girls being able to use the Aburame clan's special beetles without any problems. Shino and Aya were proud of their children, and they too had given their lives in the end to safeguard the future of their children in a battle that they took part in years into his reign as Hokage. Gaara himself met his end as he died serving Suna after passing the title of Kazekage to his own daughter with Matsuri. He and Gaara were always friends, and he was proud that Gaara rose to being the beloved Kazekage, and he privately thanked Matsuri for being there for Gaara. They both died in service to Suna, and befitting their time together, they were buried side by side, and he personally made a statue of him and Gaara shaking hands. A show of his eternal friendship with Gaara, and this was retained by Gaara's family and his own as a symbol of unity between Konoha and Suna. Then his wives finally reached their ends as well, with Sakura being the first to pass on after so many years of them being together. His former teammate was still beautiful even when she was as old as Tsunade when he first met the blonde Sanin, and he was happy that they had finally been able to be together and live as husband and wife after all that they had been through. They shared one last meal together and went to the training field they were in long ago. They spent the night there together talking about everything that happened to them. The most important was how they finally were able to fall in love with one another. Despite their history and how she had been to him in the past, to which he replied that it was not a problem anymore and he would love her either way, much to her happiness. The next day, she passed on with a smile on her face as they sat there in the field, and he gave her a tearful farewell, and when she was buried, he placed a bouquet of sakura blossoms on her grave to honor her and her namesake. Hinata soon followed 2 years after Sakura, and like Sakura, they spent time together before she passed away peacefully in her sleep. They traveled to the places they had been to in their youth, and to the places they had been to when they began to date after he had become Hokage. One such place was the very same waterfall when he had actually seen her before but had not recognized her. She blushed at the memories of it and how she felt when he found out. As soon as they got back to Konoha, the two of them spent one last night chatting with their children and grandchildren and how much faith they had for them. And they also spoke about how things turned out, with him still amazed at his discovery of her love for him when they were young and his apology for not being able to see it. She smiled and replied that he did not need to apologize to her. Hinata then passed away the very next day, and like Sakura, he made sure to place her favorite flowers on her grave. Amaru was he next to pass away from a sickness she suffered while serving as a field doctor for victims in a border conflict, but she carried on doing what she loved to do and served the people as best she could. He was proud of her even though it hurt him to know that she was soon going to pass away, as she had truly become someone he respected and loved for her devotion to saving lives without medical jutsu. She served Konoha by teaching medic nin how to still save lives should their chakra be too low for jutsu, and also taught him some of her own skills in medicine. They traveled to her home in the Rishi, spent her last days healing and tending the sick there before going back to Konoha and teaching her graduating class of medic nin. Afterwards, they talked about how they met and how he had been a positive influence on her in the end. As she died of the sickness, he made sure that she was properly buried and placed her favored scalpel on her grave while keeping the medical sachet she made for him to use for himself or others. She and herself passed on after leaving behind the title of priestess long ago to her first daughter who succeeded her. She continued to use her power to help seal away evil spirits and demons should the return with Naruto alongside her. Eventually her actions cost her as her powers drained her and she died, but not before she and him traveled to the same plaque, where he had vowed to help her pass her powers to the next priestess. She also had helped in training him some new sealing jutsu that would use his chakra in conjunction with the sealing jutsu techniques he learned from the salvaged Uzumaki clan records that he was able to find after learning more of his mother's clan. She and him spent time together in that place, and she too was still beautiful. Iful even in old age as she passed away with a smile on her face. She gave him her pin and a good portion of her powers and soul in it, which was why he never left it behind. Koyuki herself met her end after many years of them being together. She worked hard to be Queen of Snow, Spring Country as well as wife to the Hokage of Konoha and a world-famous actress. It amazed him that she had so much stamina and energy as well, since in that span of time she also juggled being a mother to 6 active boys and 4 girls and also perfecting the generator that her father left under her care and becoming a beloved and respected ruler in the lands beyond her home. In time, however, the strain took its toll on her and she had to eventually retire from being an actress as time passed until she gave throne to their firstborn son, and she spent time with him and even enjoying gardening with him. When she passed away, he made sure to play her movies both old and new and placing the same necklace she wore on her grave as his tribute to his favorite actress, princess, and wife. He also took the swords she had made for him as a present for their wedding, and he treasured them and stored them in a scroll to be used in battle if needed. Mei herself eventually passed away many years after she gave up her position as Mizukage and gave it to their daughter, who was able to have her Kekkei Genkei, as well as the Uzumaki clan's long life and vitality. She was still powerful and strong, and their marriage helped ensure peaceful relations between their respective homes. Their relationship was dynamic in many ways, as Mei was not like most women he had met, though in time he grew to love the beautiful Kunoichi and she in turn loved him in her own fashion, and was happy to see that despite still being a Jinchuriki, he would never lose himself to sadness and despair. They fought side by side many times and their times together were very interesting. He personally assured her that she was never going to be forgotten, and he made sure of that by having a statue of her and him in her home village to show the unity between them respective homes. On her grave he made sure to leave behind her favorite things as well as a carved statue of her face in her youth as well. The deaths of his friends and loved ones were hard on him, but he soldiered on to rule Konoha, but he soon passed the position of Hokage to Konohamaru and lived as an advisor to his former student, friend, rival. In time, however, he felt that his time was over and he had accomplished all that he had dreamed of ever since he was young. He felt that it would be better that he would others go on with their lives. There was still much his world had to offer, and there was no sense that he could not go out and see what was beyond the elemental nations. His time with Temujin proved that the world was vast and seeing it all was an adventure in itself, and he wanted an adventure. That was why he decided to leave Konoha and allow the younger generation to lead this time, and also he was going to see the world and the people he had helped protect from Madara and his mad plans of world conquest and control. That had not been easy to do. But the villagers agreed, and so did the rest of the ninjas of Konoha as well as the younger generations of his clan. He gave his final words of advice to Konohamaru and also to the head of the clan, and after taking all he needed, he was on his way, but not before leaving behind a message that if Konoha ever needed his aid, then they can call on him to come and help them. His travels took him to many places, and in them he met many different kinds of people. Some were good people, others were dangerous and not to be trusted, some were trying to survive and needed help. The time he spent was not just traveling and seeing the sights that were there to see, though. He decided to take the time to write his memoirs and also continue writing the novel series started by his godfather to honor him and earn money along the way. Even though he had quite the inheritance left behind by his parents and more, he wanted to earn everything by hard work and determination, and he did so, and that felt very good to him in more ways than one. It was not long before he was found by Konoha ninja once again. They greeted him and even bowed, but he never wanted that and told them that despite his status, he was still a human and wished to be treated as such. The Anbu nodded and apologized as they explained that in the years following his absence, his reputation grew to near NTLY proportions and his family was doing well, which was why he was treated with such respect. He learned of a powerful device, a chakra weapon that had been stolen and was going to be used by a Rogu force of ninja who wished to start a new ninja village with those who desired to return to the old ways and meant to attack Konoha itself to bring down the village. He did not wish that, and he planned aside his wandering days to help his village once more. They tracked down the rogue forces, and while he was able to convince some to surrender, the others did not. This forced him to fight and showing his abilities in combat once more. which had not dulled in the slightest even after years of travel around the world. However, the leader, a ninja named Karuta, defied him despite his own respect for Naruto and revealed that he had activated the weapon already and soon it would be unleashed on Konoha. The weapon was like a cannon shell and would instantly destroy Konoha in the same way Pain had done before as it left the base. He would never let that happen after all that he had accomplished and what so many had fought and died for. He intercepted the weapon with the same technique of his father and managed to use the same jutsu to move the weapon. But it detonated just as he used the jutsu. All he knew was that he had stopped it before it reached Konoha and all he saw was white. He thought that he was finally going to die. He was not afraid as he had done everything, and even though the QB told him to escape, he did not, as he would be able to see his loved ones again. But instead, he did not die as soon as the light faded away. And now here he was, in a world that made no sense to him in any possible fashion. Naruto knew that staying here was not going to be a good thing, to say the very least. He had to find a good place to hide and gather more information about where he was at this time. Nothing was familiar to him and there seemed to be a lot of noises and sights, so he had to be careful. The first order of business he had to do was to find some way to blend in, and he doubted that his clothes that he usually wore were going to do him any good in this place that he now happened to be in at this time. With that in mind, he decided to get to using his jutsu. He turned and spotted a man who looked fairly well dressed and saw that he was able to blend in well enough. With that in mind, Naruto used that technique that he recalled very well. Henge. Once he was done, he went out to see what he could learn from this world that he was in. Thankfully, it seemed that the henge was going to be able to do it, and he was soon milling around in the crowds. The people were different than what he was used to, some of them dressed in fashions that he recognized, while the others were completely different as well. There were people who had different complexions and hair color, as well as them speaking in a language that was unknown to the blonde shinobi. This prompted him to do what he could to find out just what sort of language they happened to be speaking in, but there was also a part of him that wished that there was someone who could speak his language. It was not long before he found himself going into an area of this city that seemed a lot different than the ones he had seen, and a lot more familiar. At least familiar to a certain extent as he moved around. And the people looked familiar to him as well. It was here that his nose picked up a very familiar smell. Ramen. Yes. The blonde shinobi quickly honed in on the smell, and sure enough, he was able to see the place of origin of the smell and saw that while it was not like the ramen stand he frequented all his life, it had a roomy and calm atmosphere. He opened the door find that there were only a few customers there, and the cook was a middle-aged but kind-looking woman. The cook turned and gave him a smile and spoke to him, but in the same language as everyone he met. Naruto frowned at that and decided to speak in his language. I can't understand what you are saying. The woman looked at him in surprise and then spoke in a different language, one that he quickly recognized. Oh my. A foreigner who speaks only Japanese. What do you mean by Japanese? Weeks later. The woman's name was Natsumi Oyama, and she was the head chef of this ramen restaurant that her family owned for a number of years in the city that was known as Los Angeles. Her family had moved from their homeland of Japan years before as immigrants. Though Naruto had no idea why they would move away from this Japan place, he was not going to comment until he knew more. He had grown up enough to know that until he got all the needed information, making assumptions was asking for trouble. It took a while before Natsumi agreed to hire him as a worker in her place, though this required him to be in henge, though he was able to wear clothes that showed that he worked there. Some of the other workers were not too happy at him coming, but after a few weeks, he became a good friend to them. It made it easier that they spoke the same language, though they did comment on Naruto's dialect on more than one instance. He did give a cover story that his real parents had died while in Japan and he was raised by his adopted parents in a mountain village, and only recently had he been able to go to this place in the US as it was called. He was here to try and find his birth relatives as well as rediscover his past identity, but had been so used to living in his mountain village that he was unsure about the customs of the US people. It was all a convenient lie, of course, but Naruto knew that it had to be done. Even if Konoha, the other hidden villages, or the elemental nations did not exist here, that did not mean he would speak it out. Besides, if Natsumi and the others found out that he came from a village of ninjas and all of his past deeds, they would have called him nuts. Natsumi was nice enough to help pay him and explained all that he needed to know about this place called the US, their currency, their customs, and more, though she pointed out that there was more to learn about the land than just from her. That was why she brought him some old books and magazines, and while he disliked reading too many things, the now mature ninja knew better than to scoff at information. He was able to use his Kage Bushin to even up the odds in reading time and soon learned quite a lot about this land, namely the language which he began to practice along with Natu, SME and the others in the ramen restaurant. He also learned about these people who called themselves heroes. The most recognized as far as he had seen were these two, the one in the city of Metropo, Lee named Superman and the other from the city of Gotham named Batman. He had to admit that it was strange to see these heroes. Superman was an incredible sight considering what he was able to do with all those powers of his. And the blonde shinobi had no doubt on his mind that if this Superman was in his world, he would have really gotten the attention of the ladies, all as Sasuke, and eventually him as well. Still, the man was rather nice, though the incident with this dark-side character left a bad mark on him. But it seemed that he had spent a great deal of time clearing up his name, Someth. Ing that Naruto could respect as it mirrored his own efforts in his youth to be freed from the stigma of being the Jinchuriki of the QB. Batman was similar to a ninja, judging from his garb and the way he moved. Even if they were just images, Naruto had seen plenty of ninjas in action on his side and that of others to know how a ninja moved. Batman was certainly living up to the name, but Naruto was sure that there was more to this masked vigilante, as he was called by the media. He could see from the face that this man suffered something tragic, possibly when he was young, to have made him become like this. It was reminding him badly of Sasuke, but unlike his former teammate and friend, he has not gone off and killed people for it. Naruto also had to admit that the gadgets he had with HIM were interesting and would have really been useful had they been in Konoha or any of the other villages. After a while, he had earned enough money and learned enough that he bid farewell to Natsumi and her family as well as her staff and decided to go out and find a place of his own to live in. He knew that he did not have a lot of money with him, so he would have to find another source of income at some point in time. Naruto managed to find it when he was able to compete in a lottery. The luck of the devil that Tsunade had told him that he had was more than enough to make him the lotter. Why, well enough, and had allowed him to win a sizable amount of money, just enough for a number of months, and after a while he was able to find a place to stay. It was a load better than his old apartment, and was more around the lines of the Hokage residence that he called home when he took office. And after getting the place while in his real form, he was able to get some peace, though he knew that he was going to have to find some means of income. Naruto had learned long ago as a kid how important it was to save and use his money well, so he was going to do the same here in this reality that he was in. And already he had an idea on how to put his non-ninja skills to the use of making sure that he had money of his own. Ellipsis. A night later, Naruto looked over his apartment and was in his ninja garb, as he now began to call it. He wore his usual style of clothes and had his red coat on him with the kanji for fire shadow on it. He also wore a mask that was like that of a fox but had only the lower half of his face shown, with his forehead protector there above it as well. The mask was specially made from ceramic and was chakra reinforced, so it would not be broken easily and could only be removed if he removed the invisible chakra strings that held it in place. He also happened to have his vest on, and he had his supplies to boot as well if he needed them. On his back were his swords, his supply pouch was on his back, and on his thighs were his kunai holsters, which were naturally loaded. This was going to be the first time that he was going to go into Los Angeles in disguise in his ninja garb as well. He had no doubt that this was going to be different from what he was used to, but he was all right with it, as this was something he was interested in doing ever since he got into the city. The apartment was not too far from the city and was not filled with people, so he doubted that anyone was there to see him, and it was at least 4 stories up without any other building nearby. He might not have any furniture of his own at the moment, but once he found a way to get his own money, that can be solved. With that in mind, he left behind a Kage Bushin to manage the plaque while he was gone and help make sure that anyone coming around would think that he was not going anywhere and was staying home. As he left the place, he was able to use another addition to his arsenal. Al, which was kunai armed with specially made climbing cable reinforced with chakra. This way he could move about as if moving on ropes while using his abilities to walk on surfaces once he reached them. Any distance that he could reach with leaping he was able to tackle well enough while looking around the city while using his chakra to hold on to the surfaces. The blonde had to admit that a place like this was certainly different at night, but he had no doubt that it had its share of troubles. Even Konoha had its share of troubles under his watch, and he had no doubts in his mind that the same could be said for Los Angeles. The crimes that happened here might not be in the same way as those in his reality, but they came fairly close, and Naruto was sure that he was going to run into some of those said crimes soon enough. And he was right on the money, for at the very moment he was in the city, he spotted something, and what he saw was more than enough to get him angry and heading in that direction. In an alleyway. No. Leave me alone. A pretty redhead was trying to keep away several thugs from getting closer to her. She was trying to keep herself calm at this moment, but she was terrified. Right had just left her place earlier in the afternoon to pick up some books from her friends, but they had gone to a nearby coffee shop for a drink and some time for themselves, and it was now late in the night that she was going home. Her senses were on alert as she moved through the way, but she was soon able to see the men following her. She was shocked by this and tried to lose them by running and getting home. But they were not going to let her get away. She had no other weapon with her, not even a can of mace or anything, so she ran, but sadly due to her panic she had made a wrong turn in the alleyways, and now here she was. One of the men grinned lecherously at the young woman and spoke in a very cocky tone. "Now why would we do that, missy? We're just in the mood for some fun. Plus some cash if you have any, that is." The young woman reached into her purse and took out the money from her wallet. It was her hard-earned money from her part-time job, and she was saving it all for a chance to find work, and it was hard to part with all of it. But no amount of money was worth her life as she tossed it to them while it was still in the money clip, once it was there before the thugs. She prayed that they would leave her alone, though she doubted that. "Here. That's all I have, please take it and leave me alone." The leader of the punks took the money and counted it with a grin on his face, and the same could be said for the rest of his followers, but any hope the young redhead had of being left alone was dashed to pieces when they continued to close in on her. The leader took out a wicked knife and spoke to her once more. "Not bad, you've gotten some nice dough on you. Now let's see if the rest of you is just as good." The redhead tried to get away, but her escape was cut off when one of the thugs intercepted her and pushed her back. She fell on the ground and tried to recover herself and managed to kick away the punk who tried to get to her. He owned from the kick to his stomach, but he was not deterred by that. He and his buddies had her surrounded and there was no escape for her. They finally got some money and they were now going to have some fun. The lady was very good looking and had a nice figure to boot. No one was going to save her, not like in Metropolis or Gotham, or anywhere else that had those costumed heroes. Los Angeles had none of their own, and that was good for them in every sense of the work. However, that idea was soon sent down the crapper as the punk was suddenly stopped dead in his tracks when something sudden Lee wrapped around him, and before he could ask what was that, he screamed when he was suddenly lifted into the air. The other punks and their intended victim were stunned by that as the group tried to look for their companion, with the leader shouting out, "What the fuck happened?" Another punk shouted out, but this time in pain as he was clutching his legs, both of them, and he saw two large double-pointed needles in his thighs and his legs were bleeding, but he could not move as he felt himself becoming numb. He however managed to spot something nearby and pointed to the wall. His companions turned to look but saw nothing. They were able to turn back to their wounded companion and were about to ask what the hell he was pointing at, but they got their answer when they saw another figure behind their companion, who now dropped face first into the ground unconscious. They were now facing Naruto, who glared darkly at them. The woman was stunned at what she was seeing, and so were the punks. Until the leader spoke out in a cocky but angry tone. "Who the fuck are you?" Naruto said nothing at first but then replied, "The name's not important right now. What I am going to do to lowlifes like you and your loser friends is what you should be concerned about. Oh yeah, you some sort of nutjob in a costume who thinks he can be a hero. What are you going to do to us anyway?" Naruto glared even more and decided to end the taunting and replied, "You guys are so pathetic to actually be ganging up on a woman like this. Are you losers so disgusting that you can't even afford cheap dates? That infuriated the group of punks and the leader made that obvious as he struck first. Shut up. I am going to mess you up right now, freak. Bad move. Naruto was not impressed. This guy was moving too low to be even a threat as he casually dodged the strike from the guy's knife and he avoided the rest, without moving at all from his current position. He then lashed out with a powerful kick that sent the man flying back and hitting the ground hard and skidding away until he collided with a trash can. The other punks were stunned by that, and that was the opening that the blonde shinobi was waiting for as he quickly charged in. The punks only saw a brief flash of his yellow hair as he unleashed a world of pain on them. The punk nearest him was introduced to the blonde's elbow strike to the stomach that sent him crashing down hard in pain, as Naruto used his back as springboard to land 2 kicks into the face of 2 other punks that sent them flying back. One of the punks managed to recover from the shock and tried to blindside the blonde, but got nowhere as Naruto was quickly able to dodge his attacks and appear behind him and land a punch the second he turned that sent him down. The blonde evaded another punk armed with a chain, but he caught it and used his strength to yank the guy forward and used his arm in the same way as Karabi and it did, though he used no chakra or elam in that attack as the punk was too weak to use it on to begin with. The man was sent to the ground hard as Naruto quickly flipped forward and introduced his feet to the chin of the next one as he used his hands to lift himself up like a rocket from the ground. He then lashed out with a spinning kick in mid-air to send another punk flying as he struck him right at the head. As he landed, he spun around to avoid the next one who was armed with a broken bottle intent on stabbing him in the back. The fool moved past Naruto and the blonde introduced him to the ground with a sweep kick followed by an elbow strike to the back of the head. He then turned and introduced a series of finger strikes on the next attacker, hitting in spots he knew would work to stop the man cold, and used full blown fists on the next attacker while the first was frozen stiff. The blonde then used his knees to strike at the second attacker and finished off the 2 of them with powerful kicks that sent them going off to La La Land. The former Konoha Hokage and shinobi looked to see that the punks who attacked him were all out cold. They were all unaware that he had not used his full strength on them. Doing so would have either crippled them or killed them outright, and he was not in the mood for that since they were not true threats. But a shout of fear got his attention and he turned to see the leader had somehow managed to get hold of the young woman and had his knife by the throat. By now, however, the man was in a panic and tried to find a way out of this mess. You let me leave right now, or else the bitch gets her throat cut. Naruto glared darkly at the armed man who held the woman by the throat with a knife and spoke in the coldest tone he could muster. Harm even an inch of her, and your life ends here and now. The thug saw something in the masked man's eyes that told him that this was no idle threat, and that shocked him as he began to feel a great deal of fear in himself. With that fear growing by the second, he finally relented and dropped the knife that he had on the young woman's throat. All right man, she's all right, see. Are we cool? Naruto said nothing but he reacted as he charged at only a quarter of his already impressive speed, and that was enough as he quickly grabbed the punk and tossed him over the woman he had held hostage and smashed him to the ground while disarming him of the knife. The shock of it was more obvious to the young woman, but Naruto expected that and calmly relaxed himself as he searched the lead punk and found the young woman's money. He took that and offered it to her while speaking in his most calm and friendly tone. Here you are, miss, I believe this is yours. The young woman looked at Naruto, and as soon as she realized that he was not going to harm her, she reached out and took her money. She felt instant relief as she realized she had just been saved from not just being robbed, but far worse as well. She broke into tears and nearly collapsed, but Naruto quickly saved her and spoke to her. Are you all right? I just realized you saved me not from just being robbed, but, oh my god, what they could have done before you came along. Naruto said nothing as he allowed the woman to cry so she would get the emotions out. He glared darkly at the punks and wished he could have really given them a serious beating. But he was not going to do that before a woman who was by rights a civilian. As soon as he felt that she was all right, he turned to her and spoke once more as she wiped away her tears. You feeling better? Why yeah, thanks again, I'll call the cops and tell them everything that happened here, thanks for saving me. Anytime miss. Oh. Sorry about that. My name is Eleanor Riley. Most of my friends call me Ellie for short. Ellie. Nice name, fits such a pretty lady. Ellie smiled a bit and had to admit that her rescuer felt nice. She watched him move away into her armor. Zement began to walk up the walls as if it was nothing to him at all. She had heard about some heroes being able to do that, but she had never seen it done before in front of her. She then realized that she had not gotten his name. Wait, who are you? Naruto turned to face her and after a moment or two of thinking, he replied. You can call me Fire Shadow, or in another language, Hokage. With that, Naruto moved up the wall and soon disappeared, and that was enough for Ellie to call the police. He had a lot to tell her parents and friends about what had just happened to her. As for Naruto, he had not gotten too far when he felt his danger senses kick in and he moved quickly. On the road, the gun battle that was raging in the streets was getting fiercer by the second as Naruto finally arrived at the sounds that were in the area. He looked to see a number of cars in black and white with flashing blue and red lights. His reading of Natsume's materials told him that these were cars owned by the police. A sort of government-sponsored civilian peacekeeping force and not part of the military. He saw that their situation was not too good and while he would have just let them handle it. The sight of several wounded police officers and civilians brought back images of the battles he had been in. The battle with Paint Nagato and the aftermath of the Fourth Shinobi War came back to him, and that was enough to make him move fast. The robbers were armed with high-caliber weapons and the police were still not able to do much until SWAT arrived as their weapons were not doing well. Else since the robbers had high-grade body armor on them. Things looked very grim as several of their comrades and some of the civilians nearby were wounded and paramedics were there, but with the bullets flying about they couldn't move to help the wounded. This was how bad it was, and the police had a hell of a time trying to keep the media from getting hit as well. They were about to get some help, as some of the robbers who were reaching for their clips suddenly were unaware of a strange knife-shaped object land in their group. They were not going to be unaware for long as someone suddenly attacked them from behind. A few of them were sent fleeing backwards and the others turned to see a strangely dressed guy appear in their midst and apparently armed with a pair of short knives. They turned to try and deal with him, but they were in for the shock of their lives as the man moved too fast for them to get a good lock on him. Naruto was not going to let them get a chance as their weapons reminded him of the kunai-spewing weapons of the Sky Ninja that attacked his village a long time ago, though these were a lot more dangerous than those were. Several of the robbers were badly injured, as Naruto quickly used his wind chakra to amplify the cutting force of his weapons, and also he used his strength to a slightly higher degree to hit his targets. The kunai's amplified cutting force allowed Naruto to cut through their weapons and body armor easily, wounding them but not killing them outright, as he wanted to let the police handle that, as this was still their job, but if he could keep these robbers from harming more people then all the better. He then placed aside his kunai and switched to his swords, and with the training he got from his old friend Kurabi he was doing a very good number on his foes right now. Already the results of the blonde's rescue were obvious as the paramedics were able to get to the wounded and treat them while the more critical ones were evacuated when SWAT arrived. The police were not shooting as they were not willing to risk hitting the one who had just came in to help them. And the media themselves were now trying to record what was going on before them as the new person was helping the police. Naruto himself noted that and decided to end it quickly as he cut through the weapons of his attackers and used his taijutsu to even up the odds in the battle. He placed aside one of his swords and took his special kunai and placed it back as the last of the robbers fell down to the ground, his shotgun cut in half and him out cold. The SCE might have seemed peaceful had it not been for the now incoming armored truck that was being driven by one of the robbers. Apparently he and his posse had planned to use the armored truck as an escape method once they were able to take it from the bank's garage, as this bank happened to have one in said garage. He was about to meet up with the other when he spotted from the TV what was going on. And now he apparently wanted to run down the one who had made him and his crew miss out on what would have been a very sweet score that would have been the start of a career, as they would use the money to pay for more powerful weapons and equipment to rob even more banks, not just in LA but elsewhere as well in the US, with the exception of the cities that had those cape-wearing heroes in them. And now it was ruined by this new guy, and he planned to reduce the blonde into a pile of bloody, messed up to hell roadkill. Not that Naruto was going to let that happen as he placed aside his sword. Naruto glared at the truck driver as he readied his technique to stop the last thief dead in his tracks. He summoned his chakra and soon formed a sphere of pure energy, which surprised just about everyone in the area. He then slammed the Rasengan right into the front of the vehicle and focused his chakra into his feet to hold him into place. Rasengan. The result was explosive as the Rasengan slammed hard into the vehicle's armored front, and with Naruto's much stronger chakra reserves behind it and his refined control abilities now at the forefront, it was going to be explosive indeed. The truck stopped with a roar of metal as it was lifted off its feet briefly before the metal buckled hard and began to warp and crack on impact. The vehicle hit the ground as its engine was completely mangled by the impact force alone. The driver was not thrown out of the vehicle due to wearing his seat belt, but the results were just as surprising for him as he gasped in horror from the impact force and from the landing as his vehicle hit the ground with the armored skin in the front cracked and bent. He didn't have time to react as Naruto moved to the driver's side and used his wind Chakra to cut through the door and toss it aside, and he cut him loose from the seat belt and to the ground to the police. The police and the media looked on in shock as the battle was over and the blonde shinobi turned and gave them a smile and bowed. He flicked his hand up to a building and all they saw afterwards was a flash of yellow as the man disappeared. They looked around but found no track of him, and thus they began to try and piece together what had just happened right in front of them. As for Naruto, he was already a block or two away from the whole scene as he held his father's Hirishin kunai in hand. He had learned about it from Kakashi years ago, and after years of hard work and due diligence which Sakura herself had told him he should have when they were kids, he was able to succeed and make his own. It was hard work, but it was worth it, and his old man would have been proud of him as well. He sighed and had a feeling that sooner or later, he was going to be in for the long haul. No doubt the very second the QB and him talked about it, that demonic fox was going to ride his case, as Natsumi put it once. He moved away from the scene and headed home, just as the HT was soon going to be drenched in rain. In the Daily Planet the next day. As the day went on in the Daily Planet, several of the reporters were currently listening into the news, namely that from the City of Angels. The video was from last night and had only one topic in mind. A violent shootout between a number of bank robbers and the LAPD was brought to a swift resolution last night. An unknown figure appeared and fought with the bank robbers. The figure was dressed in black and orange and wore what appeared to be a short-sleeved long coat of red with black flames with some sort of Japanese writing on it, which our analysts have translated to mean fire shadow, or in this case, Hokage. The images showed Naruto's battles with the thugs and how he had stopped the truck bearing down on him. Much to the interest of the reporters, some of whom included Jimmy Olsen, Angela Chen, and the recently arriving Lois Lane and one Clark Kent. They were all watching as the blonde Hokage's Rasengan smashed the front of the truck hard, and they also watched as he yanked away the door and had the driver down as he joined his already unconscious friends. He then used some sort of energy sphere to stop the vehicle cold and soon faded away before he would be interviewed. So far all attempts to locate this Hokage, as he is no doubt becoming known as, have not succeeded. Though in her story, a young woman named Eleanor Riley had met the Hokage, as she had apparently been saved by the Hokage from a band of thugs who had tried to rob her as well as violate her. He arrived and beat them before things could have escalated, and Miss Riley had only good things to say about the Hokage after he had saved her. As the interview of Riley came to a close as the punks were being arrested by the police, the reporter then spoke. In this reporter's humble opinion, this is a blessing thus far. For years the city of Los Angeles has no superhero or heroine to its people in the same way as Metropolis is Superman. Or as Gotham has Batman. Only time will tell how this new addition to the City of Angels will fare, but for today from TV8 News, this is Dana Carmichael bidding you a good day, and to you Hokage, a warm welcome to the City of Angels. Lois smiled a bit and turned to Clark and spoke. Looks like Superman and Batman are not going to be alone. What do you think of this new kid on the block, Smallville? I am not sure yet, Lois, but he's certainly a skilled fighter. Jimmy nodded and replied. Yeah, and he looks rather young, many late teens or early 20s, kind of like Supergirl, I guess. Still, it is kind of good to know that we have a new hero to the ranks. Clark nodded, though he still looked at the image. Who are you? Clark had a feeling that he was not the only one who was asking that very same question as well. No doubt Bruce and the others of his family would be curious as well who this new face was, and no doubt Bruce would be very critical of this new youngster. And Clark had a feeling that he was going to run into this Hokage at some point in time. He was not sure when, but if there was one thing he knew that he could count on, is that his gut feeling was right on the money. The world of heroes has just gotten bigger. To be continued. In Los Angeles, the busy streets of the place known to all as the City of Angels was so different from what one who was not a native was used to. And that applied to the disguised blonde who was currently walking the streets in a set of clothes that were the kind one associated with a regular teenager. To an early adult who had his own sense of clothing style. Naruto wore a set of black denim pants, a white shirt and a green with black vest on. The only thing that would have been different about his appearance was his ever-present birthmarks on his face as well as his now red hair, which was still spiky but draped downwards. The blonde had managed to get his hands on washable red hair dye and used that to color his hair. Naruto made sure to pick a color that would match his mother Kushina Uzumaki's own deep red hair so it would be different. He had done so in order to avoid being seen in public, since if he had not done it and left his hair in not only the natural shade and style, it would have attracted attention. He doubted that they would have recognized him as the Hokage from last night. But if there was one thing Naruto learned in his long life and career as a shinobi, there was always a need to be ready for anything. Besides, it gave him a chance to actually try and have tea. He very same cool red hair of his mother. He recalled easily how he had loved his mother's hair when he had been able to speak to her for the first and last time in his mind during his attempt to control the chakra of the QB long ago. Kushina smiled and loved that as well as loving him deeply, and that had been the key to him winning the fight, and she laughed at his words on how cool he would have looked with her hair color on instead of his father's. Now he looked the part, and that made him smile even more, and so far it seemed to be working as he moved through the city well enough without having the resort to henge. Still, it amazed him to see the city of Los Angeles. It looked so different in the day compared to what he had in the night when he went out only yesterday. Was the reason why he took the time to disguise himself and explore. He could have used henge once again to try and move about like last time, but he decided against it since there were now alternate Ives that he could use, and thus he did not need to use his chakra. That was going to be used for other purposes, and as such more practical disguises were a must for something like this. In an internet cafe. Wow, this is different. Those were the words came from his mouth that easily described this place he was in right now. He had seen the very large number of people there in the building and wondered what was this all about. He had managed to reach the inner areas of the city and had seen a large number of people there, and him being the curious one that he was, decided to take a look and see what was going on. And the things he saw in there were impressive to say the very least, as he saw computers and more all over the place. It was not that Naruto had no idea about technology, far from it, as he was very familiar with a number of things here in this world. TV, refrigerators, radios, and even a few other devices such as water heaters, watches, toasters, and a few other things are just as common there in Konoha as it was here, and the other villages as well. But he had to admit that some of the things he had seen thus far were utterly new to him. These things called computers, video cameras, cell phones, iPads, MP4 players, printers, scanners, all of these were so unknown to him. And even though he had seen a number of these already, the cars, motorbikes, airplanes, buses, and more were utterly alien to him. None if these were seen as common to him in his mind back in Konoha. Even this internet was amazing. It was like all the world's news and more were made in to one very accessible source and location. And so far he could see that the technology in this world he was in was more than enough to make the technology back in Konoha, or at least some of it, look old and obsolete. As he continued to work on the computer that he had paid for with some of the money he had on himself, he began to explore the internet and the computer to find out what he could. The first thing he did was search if there was anything related to the layout of the city he was in. The night before, he had managed to explore most if not all of the city of Los Angeles, but he edited a map, and that way he would know just where to go and what to do. He turned to one of the staff and asked a few questions. "Excuse me." "Yes, sir. How do you take this map from here and place it on paper?" The young attendant looked at Naruto with some level of confusion as he thought that everyone already knew how to use computers, unaware that the redhead before him had no experience whatsoever with computer systems. After some time, the map was made for Naruto and he in turn was given a short idea on how the internet could be used for anything. One such thing was something he knew that his godfather, the pervy sage Jiraiya, would have enjoyed immensely when he checked it out. Even he was impressed by what he was looking at as well and couldn't help himself as he smirked somewhat. Man, I can bet the pervy sage would have loved this, who knows what sort of ideas he would have gotten. Closing parenthesis. As he placed that thought aside, he decided to see what else he could learn, but he knew that he was going to have to be rather careful about it. Using Kage Bunshin to learn stuff was one thing, but doing that in a place where such techniques could arouse trouble and too much scrutiny. NT. Hat was something that went against his training. It was possible to use Kage Bunshin and use henge on them, but that would be taking a good amount of chakra, and while his control was a load better than what it was before when he was younger, way younger that is, he was not too sure about the idea of unleashing 1,000 Kage Bunshin and then using henge, since henge still required him to see a person and make an exact copy of said person. And naturally making a number of copies of other people was bound to get attention. This was why he was keeping his reading to himself, and while it was already beginning to stress him out a bit, he was not going to complain. Ellipsis. Later. It took quite a while for him to get his work done, but at least he now had a map of the whole city and would not have to waste too much time moving about. But that did not mean that he was going to have an easy time of the whole thing as he went about to get his bearings. Having a map of the city with a bird's eye view is one thing. Being on the ground and looking for said location was something else as well. But he was not going to make too much of a fuss. He naturally marked the places where he could find food shops and restaurants if he needed to grab a quick bite. He looked around to make sure that he was not going to stand out like a sore thumb, and he was happy that his disguise was working fine so far. He then decided to go and see any other sights that he might have missed. He also made sure to keep his eyes and ears open in case of trouble. He had some supplies hidden on him in sealing scrolls which he could open and use. This included special containers filled with water so he could wash away the red hair color. The next were his ninja clothes, and naturally his weapons and equipment. Most people would have been shocked by the fact that he was a ninja and he was wearing those kinds of clothes and in broad daylight, but considering where he came from, ninjas doing morning mission was not unheard of, and he had done a fairly large amount of those missions. He also decided to read up on what was the view of ninjas in this world, and what he learned was not exactly something that he had expected. When he discovered that they were not able to use chakra like he could not help but be surprised by that discovery. The way they used the ninjutsu that he was familiar with was both familiar yet odd as well. And the gear that they were known or suspected of using was both familiar and yet not at the very same time. Naruto also had to admit that some of the documentaries made about ninjas were partially right, and also those films were somewhat close. Still, he had yet to meet ninjas in the flesh, though Batman was the closest one to that description, as the man was no doubt trained well. So far this world's technology and what he had seen was something that he was still getting used to. But at the very least there were no shortages of things to do, places to see, and women to look at every now and then. So far, however, there was nothing going on that would force him to go into his ninja uniform, and for that he was thankful. Ellipsis. Hours later. Man, what a day. Naruto silently said to himself as he entered what was a small diner. The smell of food that was unlike anything he had tried before was new and tempting to him. He had enough of his previous winnings to get himself a meal, which was something that was called scrambled eggs with bacon and toasted sourdough bread. The waitress smiled at him in a rather perky and friendly manner. "Is there anything else you want, mister?" Naruto looked at the rather nice-looking woman and noted that she would have to be in her late teens and seemed to be in a rather happy mood, no doubt hoping to finally talk. A day off from work now that the night was coming in. He smiled gently at her and replied in a respectful manner, as he had matured well enough to know when to give respect to others. "I am all right, though I would like some juice if you have any." "Sure thing, we've got grape, apple, lemonade, lime, strawberry, and watermelon right now. Which would you want?" Naruto thought it over and replied after a moment or two. "I'll take the watermelon." "Sure thing there, give it a few minutes, okay?" The disguised blonde nodded as he went back to trying some of the food, and found that the food was not bad to him at all. It was actually rather nice and totally unlike any of the food that he was used to eating back in Konoha, though he had recalled trying something similar back in his traveling days. The sourdough bread was a new thing for him though, and he was eager to dig into the bread even more. The waitress came back with his drink and Naruto found the drink to be rather nice. However, his danger senses kicked in just as another man wearing a jacket came into the place. Naruto kept his cool while keeping the man in his sights, trying to discern what the reason was that his senses were telling him to keep an eye on the guy. It was not long before he noted the way the man seemed to sometimes move his hands into his pockets, like he was either checking something or making sure to have his hand on said item. The guy also seemed to be looking around in a way that told the ninja that he had less than friendly intentions. Naruto's feelings were right on the money when the man moved towards one of the waitresses, and before anyone else would notice with the exception of him, the man took out a knife and grabbed the waitress. The scream of the waitress was enough to get Eve Ryon's attention as people screamed as the man now pressed the knife into the throat of the woman he now held hostage. All right, shut the hell up. The owner of the diner moved out and saw what was happening. Naruto sensed that he had tried to reach for a weapon but stopped when he saw that the man had a hostage. But he tried to speak and reason with the man. Hey buddy, take it easy here. Screw you old man, I want everything you have in that cashier of yours, right the hell now. The man then looked at the people including Naruto and spoke seriously. And if any of you try calling the pigs here, then I got this woman right now and take one of you and do the same. You got me. The frightened people nodded and so did Naruto, but he was hardly afraid, compared the numerous foes he had fought back in his world. This guy was barely at any level, heck, even an academy student would have been a lot more dangerous than him. But he did have a hostage, so no one could make a move even though he former Hokage could tell that a few of the patrons were eager to try and stop him. Naruto knew he could easily take this guy, but using his ninja training was out of the question since it would attract attention. He had to let others do the move, and to do that, he needed to give them an opening. And he already had a very good idea on how to do just that as he reached into his pocket slowly and took out a coin. The blonde did it quietly as the man began to herd some of the more terrified people away to the door, no doubt to block it with their own bodies just in case someone came in. He in the meantime was still shouting expletives towards the owner to hurry up and give him cash. Naruto noted that the ones who he had seen were ready to make a move were looking intently at the man and not at him. Good, now we make the opening, hope to Kami this works. Closing parenthesis. Naruto was carefully moving out of the way as he studied the one who was trying to rob the diner he was in. He knew that he needed to get into an angle and that would then allow him to attack. Thankfully his ninja training had paid off as he had made sure to improve himself during those years back in Konoha, and he was so unable to get to the angle that he needed. The guy had his hostage and was focused on the waitress and the others, but had not noticed the disguised blonde as Naruto got a small coin and waited a bit more until the man turned. He focused some of his chakra into the coin, and once he was sure that he had coated the coin well enough with his chakra, he made a quick and sharp toss and sent the coin right at the man's arm. Namely at a nerve area that would cause not only pain but if hit hard enough force the man to drop his weapon, and hopefully that would allow him or the other patrons to try and take down the man without risk to themselves in the very same moment. The chakra made the coin heavier and thicker, but not enough to cut through the skin, but naturally would impart enough force to hit the nerve that Naruto was aiming for. The attack from the blonde was more than enough as the man shouted out loudly as a sharp pain snaked through his arm. G. The attack made the man drop the knife he held, and that was the moment some of the other patrons needed as one of the larger ones got up and attacked with a football-style tackle that sent the man to the ground. The pain of both attackers and the surprise of it all was enough to make the man loosen his grip on the waitress as another man came in to help the one who tackled the robber by kicking the knife away. The owner came in and brandished a handgun and forced the man to stop struggling at the sight of the firearm. Call 911. Later. Man, that was a heck of a first night. Naruto arrived at his apartment and took off his mask, coat, and vest once he was in the room. He made his way to the living room and placed his swords on the small table that he had with him in the room and sat down on the nearby chair. He groaned a bit and felt his body begin to relax after a very long night on patrol, as it were. After the episode with the hostage-taking thief at the diner, Naruto was able to evade the cops and disappear. Something that was good at now and had a lot of experience doing, since a vast portion of the people were still in shock and dealing with the thief. He also made sure to blend into the shadows that were there before quickly washing away his hair color, placing his hair back to the way it usually was, and then getting dressed. Once that was done, he was now moving about the city and had to deal with a few other problems as well. There had been some muggings that he broke up, some thieves trying to steal jewelry and other things of value, a few carjacking attempts, a few drug trafficking attempts, and a few serious street fights. None of them were in the same league as the things he had dealt with in his younger days, but they happened quite a lot. That was something he had to accept, since Los Angeles was a very large city compared to Konoha and the other cities he had seen in his travels, and the police were no doubt working very hard to keep the peace in the city. That was why he did not interfere in some of their actions unless there was a situation where the police were either unable to help in time due to distance or were outnumbered and unable to handle the situation. He had to give them credit for taking such risks in their professions, as he had read about them in the internet on his travels in the city, and while there were those among them who used their position and authority for their own ends, the rest were good men and women. Naruto got up and headed to the refrigerator and took out some ramen, and after taking the time heat them, he also decided to grab some fruit and a good drink of cool and still very much fresh milk as well, some of the things he had managed to get before his outing, finding a supermart a fair distance from his new place once he settled in. As he ate his food, he began to think about the other aspects of his time in this world. His time as Hokage had helped him see that he was still in a very unique situation. One concern was the fact that he was indeed an unknown person in this world he was in. There was no doubt in his mind that none of the things he knew were going to be found here, so he should not bother in trying to find them. This world would no doubt begin to question who he was, and sooner or later, there were going to be people who would try to find out more about him. Back in Konoha before he became Hokage, he knew that he had the registered paperwork as a citizen and ninja of Konoha as well as a member of the ninja army of the Land of Fire. And when he became Hokage, he had dealt with a few instances where he had to fill in citizenship registration papers for a number of reasons, namely when his children were born. Here, he had none of that. He did not have medical records, no birth certificate, no nothing. And if there was one thing he learned well, it was the lack of these things that instantly sent warning signals to people in government. He should know, since when he had looked through the files after the war, he found out about Kabuto's own files when he was taken in by a Konoha medic nin when he was found in a battlefield so long ago. That was why he had little problem entering Konoha in the past, since he had already files on hand to show that he was a citizen of Konoha through adoption. He needed to address this soon, as his second concern was involving his own living space. Not many people wanted to live here, and thus, there was a chance that someone was going to be rather curious why he would willingly live there. Staying in the apartment might give him a place to rest, recover, and whatnot. But without any records it was going to look very odd. This meant that sooner or later, he would have to find himself a place to live that would be off the grid but still keep him close to the city if he needed to be. Another concern was money. He had thought of it before, but he had a lot of things on his mind at the time. Winning a lottery was one thing due to his rather potent luck that Tsunade and even his wives had said was like the luck of the kami, but this was a completely different matter entirely. Winning a large amount of money was no doubt going to get attention from people, and there was no telling if they were people that did not have bad intentions. In Konoha, his winning of the lottery was not too much of a concern. Here it might be. He however still needed money in order to buy the things he needed, and as such, he needed to have a source of income. Hiring himself out as a ninja was a viable option, but he was not sure if it was a good option. There were no doubt other people who hired themselves out for legitimate and less than legitimate work and get paid for it. These people no doubt would have no desire for heavy competition, and there was no doubt that they would try and deal with him. And while he could be an assassin, he had not killed anyone just for money alone. When he finally killed both Kabuto and Madara, he Had been paid handsomely, but these men were totally irredeemable and had to be taken out as soon as possible, and money was the last thing on his mind. He had a huge amount of Ryo, but he knew that the currency in his world was not going to be acceptable, so he needed money that was native to this world. He thought it over more and more, and it was not long before he hatched up a solution, and just as he was about to do it, he got a call from none other than his former resident, the QB. "What the heck is cooking up in that mind of yours again, brat? It's been a while, fur ball, how have you been?" Naruto heard the QB growl darkly at that, and the demon fox who had been his resident for years respond to that. "If it wasn't for the facts that I can't kill you since you and I are still tied to live together. I am no longer as powerful as I once was, and the fact that I finally developed a real respect for you, I would eat you alive and piss on your remains after I take over your body." Closing parenthesis. But you're not going to do either. Right. Don't get snide with me, brat. You and I might be on much better terms than when you were still a shrimp and when you finally grew up, but we are hardly going to be full-time friends. You and I are allies of convenience and nothing more. Closing parenthesis. Naruto snickered at that, as he knew that to some degree, the QB was right. Even after their time together, his control over the QB's chakra, and to the QB's grudging respect, the defeat of Madara and his allies as well as Sasuke, they were hardly good friends. He had taken the QB's hatred in the past and eventually they became respectful to one another, but they were not like Kurabi and his own Biju. He still kept the QB sealed away, and he knew that if given even a sliver of chance, the QB would try to take over his body and use it for its own needs. Maybe we are, but you have to admit that we did a lot better working side by side than going after each other by the throat. I did help you gain your desire for revenge against Madara for the crap he pulled on you after all. Closing parenthesis. Grr, fine, and at least you are no longer a weak container like before. I swear, every time I think about how you used to be, it makes my stomach groan and my teeth ache. And at least I finally got to see you get laid and married to worthy mates. Shame they're gone, but at least those were good times. Closing parenthesis. Naruto frowned at that and replied, "Have you been peering into my memories again? It's a habit since there's nothing to do while you are in control, and besides, I only get to go out when there is a need for it. So what is on your mind anyway? You've been making a racket for a while now and I am getting annoyed by it." Closing parenthesis. Just thinking about what we need to do. Closing parenthesis. Just the regular boring stuff again, you know. I hate to say this, but I long for the good old days. Closing parenthesis. Oh, you mean the days when we were dodging away for our lives, fighting Akatsuki and Madara, as well as what was left of his plans, and also the deceased Jinchuriki that Manika of a nut brought back to life, as well as that army of cloned creeps named Zetsu. If I were to recall, you were always telling me not to be so reckless with our lives. Since when do you want those days back all of a sudden? At least those old days were not boring, brat. All we've been doing so far is foiling robberies and the like, pure C. Rap assignments if you want to hear me comment about it. Though at least this world we're in has promise, and I'm not going to be dealing with those blasted Uchiha again. So what is going on right now in this place you call your brain? Tell me now so I can get some blasted sleep already. Closing parenthesis. Naruto told the QB, and after a while, the QB replied. So that's the reason you've been making such a mental racket. Please, you've done worse before. Living on the move in this city should be enough. Stay in one place and then move around, and doing odd jobs here and there should cover it. Closing parenthesis. Easy for you to say. You don't have a lot to deal with in your own mind, and stop peering into my memories, QB, or else I am going to tighten that cage again. Closing parenthesis. At least you've grown a very good pair. Tell you what. Why don't we go and get drunk and have a lot of fun? From what I have seen, this city's got some interesting stuff to look at and experience, especially the female company. Closing parenthesis. Oh sure, go out and get drunk and get laid. That seems to be an answer you would come up. I swear you're like the pervy sage at times. Closing parenthesis. It's a start, and besides, with my healing of you, your bloodline, and Hat Senjutsu you've been working with for decades, you're going to be fine. Closing parenthesis. Haha, We have to worry about how we're going to live here QB, that stuff can wait. I was thinking of being a sort of traveling writer, might work. Closing parenthesis. And what pray tell are you going to be writing about? My travels, people, places I've seen, battles I've fought in, that sort of thing. I might even try my hand at doing. Gee, those novels the pervy sage cooked up here in this world like what I did back in the old one. Closing parenthesis. HMPH, do what you like brat, but I sure as hell hope we get to see some action soon. I am getting ally annoyed that we only have to deal with such small fry. If there is nothing else I am going back to bloody sleep. Closing parenthesis. Night then fur ball. Closing parenthesis. Same to you shrimp. Closing parenthesis. As soon as that conversation was over, Naruto began to think about that idea. Writing was something he had done a lot of times and he had plenty to write about. He could try it out and at least see if he could earn money out of it. But he still needed some things to do that. He usually relied only on an empty book and his supply of pens and his imagination, but this world had a number of very interesting things that he felt he could use to his advantage. It was going to be something that he was going to have to take in consideration, but for now, a good night's sleep could do him a world of good. After cleaning up the place and making sure to secure his home from anyone who might come in, he got some much needed shut-eye. Tomorrow he was going to do some major shopping and also possibly win some more money in either a few odd jobs or in a lottery. And when that happens, he was going to get to work. Ellipsis. 4 weeks later. Jimmy Olsen was usually the kind of guy who was working around the clock in the Daily Planet. Namely when it came to pictures and articles that were of great interest, since he wanted to be a photographer and one of the best in the Daily Planet as well. But right now, he was checking out T.'s recently circulated short novel that was becoming something of a hit with some of the younger members of the newspaper. The young man had to admit as he read the story that it was interesting, and more than once he could not help but shake his head as well as blush. Man, whoever came up with this is either a guy with a very vibrant imagination, or one hell of a pervert. Closing parenthesis. He was so engrossed in reading the book that he was not aware that there were two people coming in behind him. Thus it was not surprising that he was surprised when the book was taken from him. Hey, you know better than to be reading on the job, Jimmy. The young man gulped as he recognized the voice as Lois Lane's, and sure enough, he was right as he saw that it was indeed Lois Lane with Clark nearby as well. Sorry about that. I'm just reading the story halfway now. Lois read some of the book's contents and she raised an eyebrow at this and looked at Jimmy. Where exactly did you get this? I bought it in a bookstore. It was recently released from Los Angeles, and made by a writer there, someone calling himself Sage Thompson or something like that. For a guy who writes stories like that, he's not too bad, though not as good as you, Lois. The dark-haired female reporter shook her head and replied, "This guy's different, I'll give him that, but while he might stir a man's ego with some of this, I don't have a liking for what I have read so far, though he does have a rather extensive imagination. You mind if I take a look at this book, Lois?" Lois raised an eyebrow at that and replied, "You sure about that idea of reading this book yourself, Smallville? The stuff I just read might not be good to you." Clark smiled a bit and replied, "I'll be fine, Lois, I am a full-grown man after all." CL. Ark looked the book over as soon as Lois handed him the book, and when he read some of it, he could not help but raise his own eyebrows. The two waited until he replied, though he could not help but a slight shaking of the head as he spoke. "He's got a vivid imagination all right, still, it's not too bad, at least, compared to some of the things I have heard about." "Right, anyway, we've got a story to cover. Make sure Perry does not see you with this, Jimmy." As the two left, Jimmy took the book and hid it away, and he wondered just who this guy was. He was not very famous and was not that recognized. But the fact that he had this story made and published meant that he had some clout, no matter how small. He then got back to reading and couldn't help but get back into the swing of things. If he ever met this guy, he was going to ask just where all this came from, since despite coming close to being called porn, it had a good story. Unknown to him. Ellipsis. Naruto yawned a bit as he headed the roof of the train he was riding on and was soon in the trees. As soon as he was in the clear, he continued the rest of the trip in his own fashion. His new destination was still a day or so away. But he was going ahead to make sure that he had plenty of time to spare. This place in question was interesting to him, and exploring the outside world was going to be interesting to him. Apart from wearing a new set of clothes, he now had a backpack carrying a laptop, several portable and rechargeable batteries, a wireless internet drive connection device, and a few devices called USBs. The Say had his files, and after spending a week poring through computer manuals and practice, he was able to make good use of it. He had won enough money to buy what he felt was a good and durable laptop. And went to get the rest of the devices he now had, and worked on a short story that had him in it, though with a different name, along with his late wife Hinata, who had a different name as well. It was actually based on a mission they did together when they were not yet married and what they did afterwards. He grinned to himself as he recalled how surprised he was when he discovered the wild side of the normally gentle and kind-hearted Hyuga heiress. Hinata was not too wild, but still, it had very interesting results either way. That was his first story, and thankfully it was enough to get him paid a good amount, though the books were limited, as he had found a publisher who was willing to take the challenge and accepted the fact that he was a traveling writer. They agreed that he would end them stories via the net when on the move or when he was there in the area, and while it was odd to be sure, he was happy that the man agreed to it anyway. For now he was on his way to see the next T-City, and had to admit that it had the promise of being entertaining. That place was none other than Metropolis itself. Ellipsis. To be continued. Ellipsis. Author's notes. I decided to update this a bit before going to my other stories, since this has gotten quite a lot of interest. I will be working on my NWNLOTR story soon enough, and the others I have mentioned as well. Well, now, that takes care of this chapter, and while this is not too long or too short, and not filled with action-packed battle scenes, and the like, I like it. The reason for this chapter is that I want Naruto to be a lot more settled before he takes a more active role in the hero community. On the next chapter, we would have him meet with some of the more recognized heroes, and that would be Superman himself, along with those Superman knows and sees as his allies and friends, that being none other than Supergirl, Steel, and Lois Lane. Is there a chance that Naruto would try and flirt with either Supergirl or Lois Lane? Or even both? Maybe. He is a guy and he will be interested, as both Lois Lane and Kara are very attractive, and he is not the kind to ignore women. Though naturally he will not be too open about it. And he will keep it to himself and be friendly about it. The last thing he wants to do is get on Superman's bad side when it comes to women. Naturally he will soon figure out that Clark Kent is Superman. And Kara is Supergirl due to his training and more besides, though he will make sure to keep that to himself. How? Well, that will be up to me to play out now, won't it? Ellipsis. Now on a topic that has apparently gotten a lot of interest. My plans for Naruto's relationships, which as I have placed will be on the H route. Several reviewers have given me a bit of a debate on this route, and they have given me very solid and respectable arguments. They stated that the idea of Naruto being in a harem relationship with the DC ladies is not a good idea and would be considered wrong and also out of character. And they do have a point, as the women of the Justice League, whether the comics of the cartoon series as well as the movies, are not the kind of people who would like to be in a situation like that. Now I have talked to them and explained that I have plans myself to make it possible. But for the benefit of those who are possibly asking the same questions, I will state that not all harem stories and anime always end in the guy of the story having all the ladies. There was one anime that had the young man being joined by a number of women who were actually teachers in his class, and they were there in their own words to be his mothers. Now before anyone here starts getting H-related ideas to this anime, the women did become like mothers to him, and they help him overcome many trials related to regular life and school life. Another series is a personal favorite of mine, and this Vandred, since despite Hibiki being chased by Dita, Misty, and Jura for different reasons, he ally ended up with Dita, and in the novel for the anime they had a daughter. Harem fanfiction might get some odd marks from some readers, and for good reason, but to me it all boils down to the writer. Does the writer take the time to make the relationships with each female character involved in the harem more robust, well thought out, and developed? That is the key question in any story that has a male-female relationship. Does the relationship grow and become something better, and does it have the right plot points to reach the point for the two involved to be an official couple? Now 1. Fanfiction that has in my mind won the goal is Hung Nguyen's Tekka Dread since Slate Ranma's relationships with Dita, Jura, and Meia had been properly developed and thus the three were more than willing to be with the man they loved and share him. Because the respective relationships in the story had been given plenty of time to develop, they worked out and have reached the point that they are more than acceptable. Naturally, in the case of Xianpu and Yukio's relationships with Slate Ranma, it had reached a point that they were assured that though they had not won Slade's affections the way they wanted, they were still important to him and they remained in very good terms with the Tekkaman. The same will go for Naruto in my story. In simple terms, Naruto will be spending time with the men who he might be with, and depending on how the time is spent, then that will determine if the relationship will reach a point that the woman in question in Naruto become more than friends or remain as friends. Along the way, the women will also be able to talk to one another and eventually, depending on how their own relationship with one another, it will be seen if they are all right with the idea of sharing Naruto or not. Ellipsis. I hope that this will explain my stance on Naruto having a harem route. Naruto will not get all of them women like that. He will spend time with them and develop his relationships, and thus the number might be rather small in this case and also will be deeper than just physical attraction. Some will be merely friends and they are on good terms with one another. While the ones that have reached that point and become the ones that Naruto will be intimate with and where they do not mind being with him. That means in simple terms that Naruto will not have a harem just to have them. He will develop his relationships and take the time to know them all, and in doing so, he will show that while he had been in a marriage with more than one woman, he is not someone who does it for kicks. Besides, I will also be looking for possible loopholes that I can use to make it possible. Those loopholes will take time for me to find and also determine if it indeed can be viable for my needs and for the story itself. And do not forget that I have already made clear that some women will indeed be off limits, as I plan to have the recognized relationships in the series remain that way. Naruto will flirt with them, but in a friendly fashion, as well as he has respect for the guys who are in the eyes and minds of the said women. Ellipsis. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you all are enjoyed this video. If you do, please leave a like, share and subscribe. Also don't forget to support author of this fanfic. So let's end this video here. Until then, see you in next video.